Great. So I'll begin. Thank you for allowing us to share our work with you. We hope to work with you, anybody interested in this stuff in the future. Today I'll be talking mostly about lobbying in general, a few trends, and kind of going over where this information is filed, what's contained in it, and how you can use our opensecrets.org website to investigate and kind of digest information about lobbying. And then I'll pass it to Anna to talk about more foreign interest and dark money topics. So to get right into it, what we'll talk about here is federal level lobbying, which is mostly governed by the Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995, which you might sometimes hear called the LDA. It's focused on efforts to influence policy by actually contacting government officials and paying someone to do that. So a few things that won't show up in these reports are, for example, your average American calling their senator's office to offer their opinion, of course, doesn't have to file anything. Most political advertising is not going to be included in these particular reports. What's known as grassroots lobbying is not here, which is encouraging your employees or customers, or often if it's a membership type organization, encouraging your members to call Congress. So the classic example is a group like the National Rifle Association, which everyone knows, may be on the wane now, but everyone has known that, they wield a lot of influence in Washington. So you might be surprised to look at how much they're spending on direct lobbying and see that it's somewhat low compared to a lot of other organizations. And that's because kind of their strategy and their power comes more from mobilizing their members. And of course, depending on what election cycle it is, they have been big spenders in outside spending. For instance, they were one of the biggest spenders trying to influence the 2016 presidential election. So just be wary if you see small numbers that seem small for a group wields a lot of influence. You may want to think about what other avenues they might have for wielding that influence. And a lot of you probably already know, but I always want to make clear the distinction between lobbying and campaign contributions. Lobbying, like I said, is hiring lobbyists to contact the government and try to influence what they're doing, as opposed to campaign contributions, which is actually giving money to campaigns to try to get elected. The campaign contributions are filed at the Federal Election Commission. CRP also collects that information. And of course, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of these lobbying groups also make contributions, sometimes to the same offices that they're working for to try and get bills passed and whatnot. But you'll see lots of places on our website where that information and where it intersects is displayed together. It's just an important distinction to make. So enough about what you're not going to find there. What do they have to report? Ever since the LDA was passed 20 some years ago, a lot of the overall trend was a pretty precipitous rise until about 2010. Oh, and actually, I'm going to give me just a sec to share my screen so you can see some of this. Okay. So like this graph on our lobbying landing page here shows kind of the overall trends in spending and the number of lobbyists who are out there in DC. So as you can see, it rose up to about $3.5 billion in 2010. Then we saw declines through the teens, nothing precipitous, but a noticeable decline. It's hard to say whether that's because of who was president or their policies with regard to lobbyists. Obama did have some more restrictive policies. There also was a financial crisis and a declining economy, a stalemated Congress. In 2011, they got rid of earmarks, which was a major vehicle for deal making and horse trading. So those are some possible explanations. The last several years, we've seen spending go back up. We'll see what happens now with new president and Congress and the various effects that COVID have had, and we'll see kind of where we go in the future. So that's where we are today. Let's take a look first at exactly what they file. This is an example of a report that gets filed with the Senate Office of Public Records under the Secretary of the Senate and with the Clerk of the House, which theoretically exact copies go to each place, which is just a quirk of the law, meaning that they also, both the Senate and the House, will have a search where you can go look for these things that should have all the same information. So you can, if you want to go right to the source, you can kind of pick which version of the search you like more. But in these forms, you'll find information about the registrant, which is basically the lobbying firm. So who they hired and who's actually spending the money, in this case, pharma, how much they paid that lobbying firm. And then we get down into the actual meat of the report, which is organized by these general issue areas. They're unhelpfully, they use these codes on the forms, but on our website, you'll see this translated to like MMM is the Medicare and Medicaid topic. HCR down below in the next section is healthcare. So these are broad issues. I think there's about 80 of these broad topics that they then, within each one, are required to write a bunch of text about what more specifically they worked on. If they worked on a bill that has been filed, they are supposed to list the bill number and title, so we get that information from here. They list what agencies and offices they contacted, both executive branch and Congress. And then we get a list of the individual lobbyists who did the work, who went to the Hill or who talked to committee staff or members or what have you. So this is what actually gets filed. We grab all that on a quarterly basis and clean it up. We make sure all of the various filings for, I'll continue using pharma throughout this, but there are 10,000 different organizations that file each quarter or each year. We clean up their names so we can make sure we're getting all the activity that pharma is doing, even if there are typos or variations in names. For a new organization that we've never seen before, we do some research on them. to determine mainly what industry they're part of. We look into their lobbyists to see if they have experience working in the government in the past, which can help kind of illuminate the networks of influence. And then we provide both summary and a pretty high level of detail on open secrets. Pretty much everything that appears on that form I showed you can be found in this lobbying section of our website. There are a couple different ways to get into the data we have or explore it. Down the left-hand side here is mostly summary, our top lists, things like top spenders, which is what organizations have spent the most on lobbying, what lobbying firms are bringing in the most money, which totals by industries and sectors. So if you want to see how much oil and gas spent in 2018 on lobbying, we've pulled all that together and ranked the industries, as well as what issues are seeing the most activity, what bills attract the most attention, which individual lobbyists are making the most in campaign contributions, and who they're giving to. So those are kind of one way to explore the data from the top down. If you have something specific you want to look for, we have this unified search box here, which will search the lobbying firms, the companies, the bills, even the names of our industries. So for instance, if you are interested in pharmaceuticals and you search for pharmaceutical, you'll get a single page that you can further filter, that you can pick by category, whether you want to look at bills or people filing or what. So those are the two main ways to explore. Like just as an example, this is our top spenders list. So what we have so far is the first quarter of 2021. So these are, these top 3 or 4 organizations are always at the top. The chamber is almost always the biggest spender. And some of the major trade groups follow them before you get to like an actual corporation. In this case, Raytheon is the first company, I think, depending on how you look at Blue Cross Blue Shield. So throughout the section, if you click on a name or an industry, you'll get one of these profiles. I'll use the pharmaceutical trade group as an example. And just to avoid a dizzying amount of information, I'm going to focus on this organization profile, but you'll see very similar information if you were to look at the lobbying firm profile for Aiken Gump or the industry profile for pharmaceuticals. You'll see what issues they worked on, what bills, which lobbyists. Sometime, in most cases, you'll see how much money was spent, how many clients worked on an issue, for instance. So there's some, context-specific stuff. But as I just listed, most of these things show up here. You can see every firm that pharma hired to lobby on their behalf. And you'll also find here that they have a pretty hefty in-house operation, but they also hire out dozens of lobbying firms. So when they need to mobilize on something, they have a lot of lobbyists at the ready. Just in the first quarter of this year, they had 165, officially registered lobbyists working on their issues. And so from here, you'll see every individual. This is the lobbyist profile. You'll see every individual name of people who lobbied on their behalf. If you click through to look at a lobbyist, you will be able to find out all of the different clients that they worked for. This icon is not rendering quite right. Usually this is a little circle, which will take you to that revolving door information where you'll get a more complete picture of where they've worked before for people who have experience in the federal government. So you can look at if they previously worked on a relevant committee or worked for an important member to the issue you're interested in. And then also we list the agencies that they targeted. Over 95% of reports list the House and the Senate, so we don't single them out because you can pretty much just assume that if somebody's spending money lobbying, they've contacted Congress. But you'll also see the executive branch targets here. And then what bills they lobbied on by specific number. Clicking on these specific issue number column here will show you the actual text where they mentioned that bill. And I'll actually discuss this a little more through the issues section. So these are all the issues that pharma, all those general broad issue areas that pharma mentioned. Not too much of this is surprising for them. Maybe when you get into defense, it might be interesting what they're talking about there. But if you look at any of these numbers by clicking, you get a list from every report that got filed for them, which is, for a big one like this, can be dozens of reports. Everything they filed under, I think this is the patent and intellectual property, which is a bit of a hot topic right now for pharmaceutical companies. You'll see everything they wrote about that issue here on one page, where if you remember the raw report that they file with the Senate and the House, you would have to go through a bunch of reports and find the patent section and to get that text. So this is one of the things that we make a little easier to digest, to put it all on one page here, where you can look through what they're saying they worked on. You can do find terms that you're interested in. Now, as you might notice, this is kind of self-policed. So depending on who's filing the report and how forthcoming they choose to be, you can get things here like this large one that seems to be pretty good about listing all the bills, even talking about within the Pandemic Emergency Manufacturing Act, they worked on provisions related to IP and margin rights. So they're getting pretty specific here. But then there have been other reports filed where they really just said we worked on intellectual property, which is not as helpful. So just to let you know, you'll find a variation of information there, but it's often pretty helpful to get an idea of what they're working on. So that is like the super quick whirlwind tour through what we have for lobbying. So to give you kind of a scenario, if you are trying to write a story on a certain organization, obviously we went over exactly what we have for those, but you can go look at the organization. You can get an idea of what bills and issues they're working on. You can even, if you look at the bills they lobbied on, then you can go to the bill profile and see what other organizations worked on that bill, who might also be worth investigating. And similarly, if you want to just come in from looking at pharmaceuticals as an issue or as an industry, you can see what other organizations are working on it, if they're hiring certain firms that seem to have expertise, or certain individuals that you want to look into their connections. Those are all kind of ways of taking a first pass at seeing if there's anything interesting in the lobbying sphere of something you might be looking at. So that's pretty much what we have on lobbying. A few things to note: just the reporting schedule of this stuff is delayed a little bit because they're quarterly filings. So for example, what somebody lobbied on today, we're not going to learn about until the end of July. They file on July 20th for the second quarter. But you can still, get information about something going on now by looking at, what groups are going to be the big players that are working on it, even if we don't know exactly how much money they've spent on it yet. We also have a recent registrations page, which shows new contracts, the most recent filings. So, Regions Financial filed a report saying they hired, or Venable actually filed the report saying Regions hired them to work on banking, and we get an idea of the individual lobbyists that they expect to work on that account. So, this is maybe a page that you want to visit frequently or every once in a while just to see if anything related to your beat is popping up, if anybody's hiring a bunch of firms or something like that. And these are filed a little more timely. They have roughly a month to file this report. So this stuff is somewhat up to date. So I guess, so this follows most of what you would expect when people talk about lobbying. There are also other laws, one of which is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, under which foreign entities have to file, that Anna will talk about in a minute. But I think this is maybe a good spot to take a break and see if anyone has questions about anything I covered so far, or something that you'd like me to maybe show in more detail. Who do you think is going to take home the ice trophy? So I guess if there's no questions at this point, Anna, I will.
I got one.
Hi. Yes.
Hi. I put a raised hand up, but it's.
Oh, sorry.
It's not formal. Don't worry about it. Earlier you went on a page, I think one of the earlier pages, and it had like the number of, I think it was the top level federal lobbying page, and you had a column on the right that showed 2021. And I was wondering whether that right column was simply the number of lobbyists that had filed to date within the year.
Yeah, so these are filed quarterly, so that's how many showed up on the first quarter filings,
Right.
essentially.
No, the earlier one, you just had it up before you went to this one. The one with the graph.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the overall number,
Yes.
right. So it looks like there's a huge drop off, but
That's
in
just the first quarter
fact,
number?
that's just the first quarter
Okay.
number. And it's most of the way back to
Mm,
last year because most people file every quarter,
mhm.
but this will inch up uh,
Right.
to somewhere around 11 or 12,000 through the course of the year. But
Yeah, that,
yes,
that that was my only question, just whether or not that was pretty much rolling rolling graphic, so that after the first quarter, that pretty much represented one quarter of the overall stack in 2020. So, all right, yeah, that was one question I had. Thank you.
yeah. And that just jogs my memory of something I didn't really mention, but we have this data going back to 98. So on all these pages with organizations and the summary pages here, you can select a specific year, or in some cases, you can look at like who are the top spenders ever since we had data and see that the chamber has spent over $1.5 billion over the last quarter century. But most pages will allow you to pick the year you're looking at if maybe if you want to look in the past at all. Yeah. Okay, so with that, I think Anna, I'll hand off to you.
Great, thank you, Jan. That was really interesting, and I actually learned a couple things about our section that I didn't know. So that was fascinating to me as well. So I'm going to talk about reporting under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which also covers lobbying as well as some other activities. This is the primary law aimed at foreign lobbying disclosures. While you may see some foreign lobbying under the Lobbying Disclosure Act, most of that will be disclosed under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And I can go in and I'll go into why that is in a minute. Let me just share my screen. At Open Secrets, we maintain a tool called Foreign Lobby Watch, which tracks Foreign Agents Registration Act or FARA filings. And this is the main page for that. We launched it a few years ago, and since 2016, we've tracked $2.6 billion in spending by various foreign countries. And one important caveat to this is that it's not just lobbying spending. The Foreign Agents Registration Act is a little bit more expansive. It also includes things like PR campaigns, trade promotion, various efforts to at least bolster the image or clean up the image of different countries, different foreign individuals, foreign political parties, foreign companies to some extent. And there's a wide range of different clientele you'll see in here. And we've also tracked 474 foreign principals since 2016. Foreign principals is the word used for clients in this section of the site. Down here, you can see who the top 10 countries are that have spent since 2016 and the top 10 foreign principals or clients. This page is constantly being updated. Right now, it goes through, we're just adding 2021 numbers this week. Right now, that number, the totals do include it, but we can't toggle down. So you do see these large totals of how changing over time. And it's really interesting to look at how different the spending is going back to 2016, how much smaller the amounts are, how different some of the countries on the list are versus 2020 or even over time. And that's something that's always really interesting to watch shift. Among the foreign principals, at least for the last year, CCTV was the top for China, which is a recently registered foreign principal. That's something that's easy to track through this. And just to go through let's start with China since it's been in the news recently. All of these link to what are called our country profiles. These have the total spending broken down by year, by country, and you can see how much of that was government spending versus non-government spending each year, as well as how much was spent by each foreign principal or client. Under the foreign principals tab, you can actually have links to the different foreign principals, so you can see what firms they were paying, as well as other details about about the firms and those payments that I'll get into later. You can also see which registrants were representing those foreign principals and that country generally. These are the firms that are working for the clients, in some cases lobbyists working for the clients, or US-based affiliates of these foreign principals in some cases. As you can see, a lot of these in the case of China are US-based US-based affiliates of foreign principals, where when they exchange money with either a US-based media outlet that promotes their interests, or other types of entities that might engage in activities that fall under the purview of FARA and are required to be disclosed, they would be listed here. One really great thing about the country section is that if you don't know what country you're really looking for, you can just click on the countries tab and see which country had the highest spending, see how many countries have been active since 2016. And we have this really great map that I find just fascinating, where you can click around and see hover over the different countries and see how much they've spent, as well as filtered, where you can see just which countries spent over certain amounts or even under certain amounts, which gets really interesting from either. And it's not always the biggest countries that have the most spending. So you have like really tiny countries in some cases spending really large amounts. And in those cases, those are all clickable, which is helpful. So you can just go directly to their profiles and see more information about those countries. To jump over to foreign principals, which are the clients I mentioned earlier, this is what would be linked oh, sorry, I just realized I skipped registrants. Sorry about that. So going over to registrants, which are the firms, the lobbyists, and the US-based affiliates of foreign principals that are acting on their behalf, that are promoting their interests either in a way where they're lobbying or where they are working on PR campaigns or other types of communications. Not all communications campaigns fall in here. Usually it's whatever is quasi-political. So you'll see a lot of embassies, but not all embassy spending is disclosed under FARA. It's just when they are pushing for either changes in policy or in the law, or when they get into that quasi-political realm, when they're doing something more than just diplomacy in the case of embassies. And there's a variety of different reasons that certain things might be exempt or show up in here. And I'll go into that a little bit more later, but these are the main firms and registrants. You can see, of course, the total similar to the other sections of the site, and go through and click on the different registrants to see details about them. Their total income is the amount that they received from foreign clients reported under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And their number of lobbyists are the number of individuals who had filed what are called short forms, which means that those are the number of individuals at that firm or entity that are acting on behalf of foreign principals or foreign clients. And so you can really go through and see which country that registrant is working on behalf of, see what the foreign principal or client is. In this case, Barzan Holdings is affiliated with Barzan Aeronautical, which is the US-based affiliate. Gets a little bit confusing at times, but you can click through and see which foreign principals are paying which US affiliates for those kind of influence campaigns. And you can also go over to, oops, I don't think any of theirs are actually registered. A better one would be Aiken. So you can go over to the lobbyist page and see, yeah, so you can go over to the lobbyist page and see which lobbyists are working for them. The other ones aren't good examples of that since they are US affiliates of the foreign entities and generally don't have US based lobbyists as much, and haven't registered them in recent years. But in this case, you'll see the lobbyists, and you can also see where it says see LDA info. That links up to the lobbying section that Dan was showing you earlier. So you can see what other clients they might be working for that registered under the LDA. And then you can go directly to the filings as well, and under the short firm filing, and all the links are right there. And you can then go to foreign principals to see which clients they have worked for that year, and then how much those clients or foreign principals paid them. Moving over to the foreign principals tab, that's pretty similar in structure to the registrants countries. We have the number of foreign principals by year that we're tracking. We've seen about over 2,900 lobbyists since 2016, and those are the individuals, not the firm registrants. And you can go through and see who the top clients are. In this case, the government of Japan has spent pretty heavily, as well as some other governments. It's not uncommon for bigger governments to be up there. And following that can be one way to find stories, just seeing who the top spenders are in some cases. And you can see how much they spent over time each year. We're currently integrating 2021 data and hoping to have that in within the next few weeks. In the meantime, if anyone is looking for it, please feel free to reach out to us directly. It's something that we do have. We're just working with our tech department to actually get it on the site. And so each of the foreign principals profiles, similar to the registrants profiles and the country profiles, shows which registrants are linked to that as well. So in the case of Japan, these are all of the different registrants that have worked for it. And it's really just a mix of US affiliates that are tied to foreign principals in Japan, but also you'll see these firms that are more traditional lobbying or communications firms, and how much they paid to each. And this is, in some cases, it can be a pretty long list, and that's just for 2020. We also have, as you're going through, if it gets confusing or if you just want to learn more, we have a really great background page that we worked to put together. This explains all the basics to some extent, what I'm explaining now, but in a bit more depth, such as who FARA registrants are, who foreign principals are, and what is and is not in these reports. So for example, the LDA exemption that I mentioned earlier, only applies to clients that are not foreign countries or foreign political parties. And so if you see a foreign client in a Lobbying Disclosure Act filing, generally it will be a company, or in some cases an individual, since those are more commonly able to, those are clients where you're more commonly able to claim that exemption. Whereas if it's a foreign government or political party, they have to be under FARA. If it's an individual or a corporation, they have a choice. And so in some cases, a foreign agent may register under both the Lobbying Disclosure Act and FARA. And in some cases, they may do one or the other, which gets a little bit confusing. Other things that are not in the reports include commercial activities. So this can be anything from basically just if they're selling things abroad, if they're only trying to promote their business for purely commercial purposes rather than as part of a PR campaign with a quasi-political purpose, then that would not show up under FARA either. Lawyers and legal service providers, you will see a lot of lawyers in the FARA filings since many of them do operate as lobbyists or as foreign agents, but when they are solely providing legal services, that is not something that's legally required to be disclosed. And then there's a variety of other exemptions that are on here as well as that are not listed. Private nonprofit political activities, news and media outlets, which is one that's received a lot of controversy recently. Bona fide media outlets are exempt from FARA, but when they're run by foreign governments, sometimes that gets a little bit sticky. And the Department of Justice has compelled multiple different foreign media outlets to register over the past few years because they were controlled by the government and engaged in activities that the Department of Justice deemed to be under FARA's purview. And so that's another one that can be really interesting to follow. And as I mentioned, diplomacy, you will sometimes see embassies, but that's when they're engaging in something beyond typical diplomacy or consular duties and are in that quasi-political realm. You also have kind of a brief history of FARA, how it was originally started as a law to fight Nazi propaganda in the United States and has since evolved as lobbying has evolved. As well as the methodology. And I know I'm short on time, so I won't go through all of this, since I would love to be able to go through the dark money as well. But one more tool on the Foreign Lobby Watch section is our search tool, where you can have a full text search of any FARA filing dating back to the 1940s. And you can type in things like, actually searched pharmaceuticals earlier. I was surprised how many FARA filings mentioned pharmaceuticals in the spirit of pharma being mentioned earlier. And you can see how many times that term was mentioned in recent filings, but also going back decades, as well as which client was in there, which client was being represented in those filings, which registrant was working on that, and links to the filings themselves, as well as which country and date. You can also filter by location, by which client they're working for, as well as filter by date. And that's most of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and I'll try to very quickly go through dark money if we have time. I don't know if we want to do questions or since I know we only had until about 8 p.m. If anyone has questions on the Foreign Lobby Watch, I'm happy to take those before switching to dark money.
Yes, Balls. If you have any questions for Anna, please share them now so we could move on to dark money before we wrapped up. Any questions?
I don't see any. All right, great. Well, I'm gonna just very quickly run through dark money since, sorry about that. Generally, I do this as a presentation on its own, so hopefully I can pretty quickly get through this. Dark money is basically what is not disclosed in the other filings. It's any type of spending where the source of the funding is unknown. This can be spending to influence elections or other types of political purposes. Dark money groups have reported spending over $1 billion on television ads, online ads, and mailers since Citizens United, and that's just what's in FEC filings. There's a lot of different types of dark money. 501c4 nonprofits are one of the main types of dark money that you'll see show up in FEC filings, where these nonprofits, which are supposed to operate for the purpose of social welfare, find loopholes that allow them to spend unlimited sums on politicking. And so long as they describe their activities as being educational or avoid certain words at certain times, and I'll go through those loopholes very quickly later, they're able to never disclose their donors, and in some cases never disclose their spending to the Federal Election Commission. We have a part of our website, since I don't think I'm going to get through everything, called darkmoney.org that is really goes through all of the basics of dark money. If you want to read up more, it goes through the biggest spenders, how everything works, and hopefully I'll be able to go through some of that right now. We also have an outside spending section. In addition to dark money, it also tracks spending by groups like super PACs, which are legally required to disclose their donors, and you can filter by disclosure, by election cycle, as well as a few other different ways. One thing that's been interesting to follow over the years is with each election cycle, if you look to the right, has been that spending reported to the FEC by groups that don't disclose their donors has gotten a little bit smaller in recent years, but spending by groups that partially disclose their donors, so this would be spending by super PACs, which are legally required to disclose their donors, but that may take money from dark money groups. So the dark money group is once removed from the spending, hence being partially disclosing group. That's something that is on the rise. And so we're seeing a lot more spending by super PACs that are taking money from groups that do not disclose their donors, rather than direct spending by groups that do not disclose their donors. And that's something you can track with these charts. We saw more than $1 billion total dark money in 2020 elections. This was a combination of direct spending reported by dark money groups, TV advertising spending, some of which was reported, some of which was tracked through FCC filings and Kantar Media, digital ad spending from from Facebook, from Snapchat and Google, as well as contributions to political groups, which made up the bulk of that $1 billion, 660 million, which is when dark money groups were giving money to super PACs that's then spent on elections. So only 88 million of the $1 billion in dark money we were able to track in 2020 elections was actually FEC reported spending by dark money groups, which is just a really interesting development and something that's hasn't really happened in previous election cycles. So we were able to calculate the total impact of certain dark money groups versus how much they reported. On the left here, we have the top dark money groups that reported their spending to the FEC and how much they reported. So you're seeing numbers like 17,000, 15,000. And on the right, we have the total dark money that was not reported. So this includes their contributions to super PACs, their TV ads that might not have been reported to the FEC because they didn't use certain language and avoided certain time periods, online ads, pretty much everything that I mentioned in the last slide, and you're seeing much larger numbers. One Nation is a really great example of a group that has exploited this. They have a affiliated super PAC called Senate Leadership PAC that they gave, I believe, more than $60 million during the 2020 election cycle. And One Nation did spend to some extent until the FEC disclosure window kicked in. So during the either 60 or 30 days before election, depending on what type of election it is, every group that's spending, mentioning a candidate, needs to disclose their spending. But if you spend, I'm just jumping ahead a little since I know we're on short time, but if you spend before that and if you mention a candidate, but don't say vote for this candidate, defeat this candidate, you're not legally required to disclose that. So you have spending, independent expenditures, express advocacy, which is legally required to be disclosed to the FEC at all times. So that would be where you say vote for candidate. And then you have electioneering communications or issue ads where you may boost a candidate, talk about how great they are or how terrible they are in a lot of cases. But because they avoided those words and then they stopped spending as soon as that was something that needed to be disclosed and gave more money to their super PAC and spent on online ads, they never disclosed any of their spending to the Federal Election Commission. I go back. Yeah, so they had they were the largest spending dark money group in the 2020 election cycle, and they've disclosed none of that to the FEC. And I could go into a lot more examples, but I know we only have 2 minutes left. What would y'all rather me go over, or should I just go on and cut it short? I know we got a little bit of a late start.
Yeah, whichever. I think we can go over. We can do about 10 more minutes since we started a little late.
Wonderful, thank you. I would love to share all this. There's a lot of interesting stuff, and this is one of my favorite things. Okay. So you do see these large spending groups, so thank you so much. And that really highlights where that growth in partially disclosing group spending comes in. And that's the blue line here that you're seeing go up, whereas spending that's disclosed to the FEC directly is the red line that's going down by dark money groups. And let's see, so to jump ahead, how are we tracking this? These are some of the dark money sources that we use. This is a map of the different types of documents that we'll consult outside of just Federal Election Commission filings. And this can include things like Form 990 tax returns, Google ads, Federal Communications Commission political ads, and I'll go over some of these pretty quickly. And I'm happy to share this with everyone since it's a good resource. I created it for myself to use, and I know it's helpful to other people to some extent as well if you're trying to track dark money. So one of the first and to some extent best resources we have for tracking dark money is Form 990 tax returns. These are legally required to be disclosed every year and filed every year by 501c4s and other 501c nonprofits. One of the problems with relying on the information in these is they are only filed 5 to 10 and a half months after an organization's fiscal year is over. So you are in many cases getting the information long after an election is over, which can still be interesting, but is not always the most timely if you're trying to report before an election, and not always the most helpful for voters, but has a wealth of information about the groups that is not reported to the FEC, such as their annual revenue, their spending, their board members, the grants that they are giving to other groups, as well as all of the other details that I had highlighted in that chart. Tax exempt status application materials, Form 1024 for 501c4s or 1023 for 501c3s are also really useful. This is what's filed by nonprofits when they apply for tax exempt status with the IRS. In some cases, it can even include donors that provided seed money to the nonprofit. We actually had something recently where we identified a Swiss billionaire who had given seed money to a nonprofit. And so sometimes those can be really interesting. Sometimes you can see emails back and forth with donors or with the IRS, and sometimes they can be 2 pages. So it really does vary between different documents, depending on the group, how much of a process it was for them to get tax exempt status and how much information they disclosed. And I'm gonna skip over the other because that's not helpful. This is what a 990 looks like. As you can see how many contributions and grants they give, their revenue, how much they spend, as well as all of that in more detail throughout the 990. Pharma's 990 is consistently more than 50 pages. So it's not something I'll talk y'all through, but a really interesting thing to look through. And just to go back to that, you can find where you can look through the 990, you can see who the people are, the leadership, the employees, the board members, to some extent contact information if you're looking into a group that you don't even have contact information for, to the firms and contractors that they're bringing in. They're legally required to disclose their top 5 contractors who they paid $100,000 or more, as well as other financial information. And we will often track the different grants that nonprofits give each other because while they're not legally required to disclose their donors, they do have to disclose grants to other nonprofits. So in that way, we can uncover when a nonprofit's donors buy the grants from another nonprofit. So we can see if its donor is another nonprofit. And then we can create stuff like this, where we can really create networks of those nonprofits and see who's giving to who's paying the same contractor, and see how in a lot of cases groups will shuffle money between each other. One other thing that I've got on here is political ads. Political ads are a newer resource that we have started looking to for dark money. And I know I'm going very fast, but I would love to fit all this in. And they are an invaluable resource because you get the information a lot quicker. You don't necessarily get as robust information as you do with Form 990s, but you do get a lot of interesting information at a much quicker rate than you do with the Form 990s, which are months and months after their fiscal year is over. This is, I should say addata.org. So addata.org, and I think it's in the next slide, is Open Secrets political ad section. We track Federal Communications Commission filings, which are TV political ad filings and radio ad filings. Right now, that section of the site is under construction, so it's not being updated, but I hope we will start it back up at some point. But our online ad section is another new exciting section that we are updating. 1 second. talking too quickly. So our FCC section currently under maintenance, we have text of over 5.9 million documents that we've extracted, parsed. When it's working, it is updated daily. This includes contracts, invoice, and other filings from FCC files. This can be both political ads that explicitly mention candidates or issue ads. So if your beat is a particular issue, our database is a full text search of all those files. So you can type in oil or drug companies or pharmaceuticals or the name of a group if you're looking for that as well, and see how many times it's been mentioned in filings. And we also, if are looking for something and not able to find it on the site, we're happy to provide data. We have a lot more internally as well. And in more accessible formats. This is what the filings look like. You can see the names of the groups, how much they spent. You can also, interestingly enough, see which shows they're spending on, which can also sometimes be interesting and a fun thing to do. You can search for the names of your favorite shows. One of my favorite projects that someone did with that is they compared the total political spending by another country versus how much is spent on Wheel of Fortune just in the United States. And there was apparently more spending on Wheel of Fortune than there was in this entire other country on politics and elections that year. And so there can be some interesting projects with that as well. Their NAB filings are where they would actually report the issue that they're spending on. Sometimes this can be a candidate. Sometimes it can be an actual issue like oil, gas, pharmaceuticals, drug companies. It really varies what they'll put. And they'll request purchase time. We've also used this tool to uncover shell buyers where we will check for matching addresses or matching names. So in this case, we were able to find that there was another firm located at the same address that was being paid by both a candidate and an outside group supporting them, which is one of the factors that is considered when the FEC looks for legal coordination. And so we were able to find that by typing in the address into the full text search. We were also able to find when matching buyers, and this is the same firm, decided to start using a new address, but use the exact same buyers for the candidate and the outside group supporting them. And so we were able to continue tracking that because of the full text search. And you can also track signatures, but those aren't searchable. Those would be something that you can see in there, but are not necessarily OCR'd. And through that, we were able to build this chart where we could see that the candidate, as well as some outside groups supporting them, were all paying the same firms who were all paying the same individuals. We were also able to see in one case the exact dates that spending would take place. There was a dark money group called, so there was a super PAC called Tennesseans for a Better Tomorrow that got all of its money from a dark money group called A Better Tomorrow for Tennessee. Both of the groups were created shortly before the election. And because of FCC filings, we were able to see that the dark money group gave the super PAC almost the exact amount of money that they made a media buy with on the exact day they made that media buy. And so you can really get very specific with some of the information. And in this case, not just see that they gave the money and then they made the media buy, but see how suspect the timing was in those cases. And both of those groups shut down right after the election. Just to quickly go through online ads, I think I have one more minute. Yes. So online ads are the other newer section. We're really excited to integrate these. Right now we have Facebook and Google on the website, but we have a wealth of information internally as well. We also internally have Reddit, Snapchat, and an archive of Twitter. Twitter shut down their online ads in 2019, but we do have an archive of that that's fully searchable internally. So feel free to reach out if there's any of that that's something that you're looking for. On our website, we have the online ad section. This is also available through the addata.org, which directs to both the TV spending and the online ad spending. And this is the main page. We were able to track 2.1 billion in spending during the latter part of the 2020 election, and 14 million ads, 98,000 advertisers. Down here, you can see who the top advertisers are on Facebook and Google, as well as their total spending altogether. Before this, you would have to check the separate platforms. We were able to integrate everything all together. And right now it's under maintenance as we integrate 2021 data, and we stopped it after the election cycle, so we'd have a clean end, but that should be coming within the next few weeks as well. We're currently just updating a lot for the next election cycle. You can also see geographical data on here. In this case, where you can see spending on Google by state, spending on Facebook by state, and see which states have the most concentrated spending during those periods. Each of the groups that are spending have their own profile, so you can see how much they spent on Facebook and Google, as well as in the case of Facebook, how much they spent per page. So the groups would be listed in the disclaimers who paid for them, but they're able to spend under the name of a variety of different Facebook pages. So for example, Majority Forward paid for ads through not just the Majority Forward Facebook page, but also through 99 counties and Our Sky Big Country. And in some cases, you'll see long lists of different pages that are paid for. And you can see how their spending changes over time and week by week. You can also see total Facebook spending by state broken down by the groups as well to see where their spending was the most concentrated. And that'll be broken down by election cycle too. You can also look at our candidate pages. All of our candidate pages, presidential, Senate, and congressional, should have an online ad spending tab now where you can see all of the groups that have spent on them. This includes not just super PACs, but also dark money groups, retailers who are using their name on social media, at least on Google and Facebook, 501c3s, fan pages, and there's just a lot of different things that we've gone through and classified those and marked who's paying how much and all of that. And you can kind of dig through those as well. And we build things like that. I'm gonna skip through the end. That's pretty much the gist of the dark money section. I could talk about it for hours, but those are the big tools. Just to give a summary.
Thank you, Hannah. I think I have a question. Do you know why companies won't pay for the same ads under the same under their name, or why are they using different names instead of just one?
Well, it's hard to know the specific reason different companies do different things, but we can, to some extent, guess that it may be, based on what we've heard, backlash against the company. We have seen protests where people have boycotted companies based on their political giving. It could be based on even personal consequences, that they don't want people to know they were supporting a certain candidate or a certain cause. And especially if it's a candidate that's considered more controversial, there's more risk from a PR perspective for that company if they're looking to support them. So doing so behind the scenes could be advantageous in that. I don't know if that's why all companies do it, but that's one reason that I have heard.
Okay, got it.
There's also, so the one of the charts I actually skipped over, and I should have just kept doing it, was so the recent, after the Capitol riots, a lot of companies pledged to stop corporate PAC giving. And although they pledged to stop corporate capping, a lot of the companies have also given through dark money groups. So that's a good example of a reason companies might not want to spend directly, because they either pledge not to support certain candidates or pledge not to give and engage in political activity at all. And so you can see how much these companies had given to 501c4s and trade associations, which would then spend on elections as well as other things. And so that's another example of a reason that companies might not want to spend. And just to give the background of this data was something we analyzed, but from the Center for Political Accountability, which is another really great nonprofit that tracks voluntary corporate disclosures of giving to political groups as well as nonprofits and trade groups. So I highly recommend their databases as well. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question in the chat from Jeff Patterson. He asks, how can I drill into organizations that use the church exemptions for filing 9?
That is a great question. I wish I had a good answer to it. I have gone down many rabbit holes looking to find a way around that. When I realized, early in my career, I spent a long weekend looking into Ku Klux Klan chapters that call themselves churches, and so they don't have to file any Form 990s, even though they technically operate with tax exempt status. And at the end of it, I could not find anything. That was months after I started, a couple months after I started in CRP in 2015. I remember being so disillusioned and frustrated. I wish I had a good answer to that. There's not a lot of information about churches with the Form 990s. You can see when they are spending on online ads. A surprising number of religious institutions and even religious line colleges were spending on online ads over the last election cycle. So that's one thing if you're trying to see how they were spending on politics that you can check. On the off chance they're spending on political ads, the FCC filings may be something else to check. Incorporation records, if they are an incorporated entity, that's not something that we have, but is also a useful thing to get from generally the Secretary of State of each state will have records that are searchable, some states more so than others. But those would probably be my best bets for those. You can also, if you're looking to see what other nonprofits gave money to that church, if you think perhaps certain foundations or nonprofits might have, we can actually do this. We can search the full text of our grants to see if the church shows up in any of our grant data. So because they do have to disclose grants, we can see if any of the other C4s or C3s, our database is primarily C4s, but does have some C3s, had disclosed any grants to that church. So that's another thing, would be looking through other nonprofits data for funding. But that's, I know, very limited.
Okay, great. And I think we have the last question from Brandy. She asked if could get the links to the web pages that were referenced today.
Can we get links to? Absolutely. I can send over the links to everything that I mentioned and to the charts as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Of course. I assume the best way to do that would be to share an email, and then
yes,
you can share that with everyone. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for having us.
No problem. Are there any more questions before Daniel and Anna logs off? Any questions?
I know we covered a lot of ground tonight pretty quickly, and we're always open if you have any questions, you want us to walk you through anything, or if there's something you don't see on the website that you wish you could get at, it's possible that we can do something behind the scenes that's not on the website. So we're always open to being contacted for background or whatever you need.
Yeah, just really always happy to help with any projects, whatever data you need. And you can either contact our press line, press@crp.org, or we can share our contact information so you can have that directly as well.
Yeah, I've reached out to you guys before, and you guys are very responsive. So
we try to be.
Yeah. Great. So thank you so much, Dan and Anna, for sharing your time and expertise with our members. It's greatly appreciated. And guys, I know it's a lot to process and to digest from tonight's webinar. So please stay tuned for the recording later this week. And if you missed our 2 recent Watchdog reported webinars, you can view them on our website. And of course, if you have any questions or concerns, you know where to find me. So that's it for tonight. Thanks for joining, and have a good night.
Thank you.